Is a comedy still a comedy if bad things continually happen to the protagonist? Hey guys, so welcome back. I'm doing things a little bit different this week because usually I write out a little bit of a script to follow along, and I did not do this week because I was up north exploring ice caves on the shore of Lake Superior, which is of course what you do when it's freezing cold in Minnesota and you have Polar Vortex Part 4, which it's been continually cold here and just remains cold. And so, enjoying the cold, I did not actually come up with a script. So instead, I'm just going to kind of do some extemporaneous speaking on a different Shakespeare play that we haven't covered yet, called The Taming of the Shrew, which is not the easiest Shakespeare play for me to talk about because it is not my favorite in any way, shape, or form. The reason I'm not really a fan of Taming of the Shrew is mainly because I am a modern reader reading an older play in which ideas of feminism didn't exist the way they do today. And I struggle with this play because of what happens to Katerina, the main character of it. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the plot, the story is about Katerina, who is a young woman who kind of has a sharp tongue, snarky attitude, and none of the men in her town want to marry her because she's kind of bullheaded and very headstrong. And her father is trying very, very hard to get her married off so that her younger sister can be married. And Katerina is having none of it. She does not want to get married. She does not care for men. She wants to be her own woman, kind of like Merida and Brave, but Shakespearean. And she is not at all interested. And so what happens is that this character named Petruchio comes along. He's kind of, how do I explain him without calling him insults? He's a very interesting character and kind of a charmer, but also kind of utterly untrustworthy. And her father, Katerina's father, agrees to have him try and woo Katerina in exchange that if he marries her, then her younger sister can get married and all will be well and blah. But what really happens is that Katerina, who is described as a shrew, must be tamed by Petruchio, made into the ideal woman, kind of broken down and turned into this woman who is marriable. And I really struggle with this storyline for many reasons, mainly because I myself am a feminist, and find this very disconcerting that this is an idea of what women can't be themselves, that they must become this other ideal in order to be married. And I really struggle with this play. I have seen it performed, and I think what makes or breaks it for me is the way that it's staged. So the way that I saw this play staged was by a theater company from England called Propeller, and they were an all-male cast. And the way they did it was that they added a little bit at the end of the play. The way that this play begins is with a character named Christopher Sly, who only appears at the beginning, who is not a very great person, and this theater company decides to kind of try and teach him his mistakes and show him this play. And within the staging I saw, this play then becomes the story of the Taming of the Shrew, and at the end Christopher Sly, who also plays Petruchio in the show, comes back and he's really macho and he's all happy that he's tamed this woman, he's made her to follow his will. But at the end, the character who plays Katerina comes back as the actor playing her and is sort of like breaking a fourth walls in a way. And she looks at him and says, "It's just a play. It's just a play. You don't get it. You don't understand. You have not learned from your mistakes." And it really has this interesting effect of looking back and showing that what Petruchio does is really terrible, and casting a light like that on it I think is really interesting. It definitely takes away from the comedic aspect and the last half of the play because it no longer becomes a sort of comedy that the way we think of comedy. I think it's really interesting that this play is labeled a comedy because while it is full of ribald humor and a lot of wit, it definitely has a lot of darkness to it. Most of Shakespeare's comedies do have darker layers to it, but I think Taming of the Shrew is one in which it really comes through the most. I took a class in college called Comedy, Text, and Theory, because that's what you do when you're a cultural studies major, but this class was definitely opened my eyes up to what comedy is, because I always think comedy has to be funny, it has to be this or that. And really, comedies don't necessarily mean that. They mean that they have a happy ending. Now, whether or not this play has a happy ending or not, and whether most comedies actually do have a happy ending or not, is complicated to say. Happy endings usually mean that there's a marriage involved instead of death. And in Shakespeare's case, that's usually what occurs. But Taming of the Shrew was just a really complicated play in the fact that it's hard, in my position, to read it and not find it really sexist. I know that many theorists, not many, some theorists, are very dislike taking a feminist approach to Shakespeare because feminism was not a thought process that was exactly expressed the way it is now at the time. There is a lot of criticism of the way approaches cultural studies takes towards Shakespeare. But I think that having these ideas in mind are really important because they're important. I cannot read this play and not feel upset at the way Katerina is treated. You cannot ignore these things. And I think that the way that Propeller did it was interesting, that they added a different line to the end. I think there's other ways of staging it in which you can keep the script intact the way it is, but bring out different nuances. The way you have actors state different lines, the way you have them stand on the stage, what they do with their bodies, can really bring out certain messages of that and make this play, which could be expressed as a very sexist statement, as a very strong way of expressing the patriarchy, or you could use it to break down the patriarchy. And I think that's what's really interesting about Shakespeare's plays, are the ways that they can be manipulated to do different things, which makes them both awesome and kind of terrifying. So while this is definitely not one of the most enjoyable plays for me as a person, it's a really interesting one. It is full of some really funny bits. There's a great scene where one of the more minor characters has this ridiculous soliloquy that I absolutely adore, in which he describes Petruchio entering on a horse, and it's the way I saw it performed is one of the funniest things ever. It's just this really ridiculous long speech going into absurd detail. And it's funny. It's funny what becomes funny in this play, because there's so many things that I don't find funny. I don't find the comments about women funny. I don't find certain aspects of that. But there are just elements that you can pull out, and it's an interesting play. What's also kind of fun about the Taming the Shrew are the different ways it's been adapted. There's the Cole Porter musical, Kiss Me Kate, which I'm a big fan of Cole Porter, so it's kind of fun to see that. But that play, they actually kind of keep the same sort of storyline the same, which I have mixed feelings about. But then there's also the movie from the 1990s, 10 Things I Hate About You, which is really fun. And I like how they both modernize the text, but yet keep Katerina as a character integral to not being worried about changing herself. She doesn't have to change. It's more about the two main characters coming to terms with themselves and accepting each other for who they are, instead of, oh, you have to change to do this, you have to do that. And so for the 1990s, I find that movie really, really great. And it's funny, and it has Heath Ledger in it. So if you've not seen 10 Things I Hate About You, I highly recommend that. As a 90s kid myself, really, really recommend that movie. So that's really it for this week. I don't really have much to say. I could blabber on and go off on more tangents, but for now, I'll keep it there on Taming the Shrew. But I'll be back next week with, I'm not really sure what I'm going to talk about yet. I did find a really fun online little questionnaire thing where I might just choose a few questions about Shakespeare and give my opinions on them, but we'll see. So that's all for this week, guys. Cheers!